Hello everyone, welcome back again to my channel. And just quick reminder, we all know what happens, so please join me on locals and join my mailing list and follow me on Instagram, so then you know where I am. I'm not planning to be anywhere else, but who knows, right, with this platform. So today I have the guest that I don't need really to introduce. Scott Ritter is back in the house. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you very much for having me.
So today I wanted to jump into the first thing, which is all the clown governments, many of clown governments are sending those tanks. We know where they go sooner or later. I'm trying to be sarcastic, but it's not really funny. It's just, you don't know how to approach this subject anymore. So this looks to me like the grand finale is coming, right? And I would like to ask, what do you think this le grand finale will look like from the Russian standpoint? How Russia will end this? Because Russia is going to end this, right? How they're going to end this? And then just thinking back in the history, Scott, and you know this so well, I don't want to say the full name, you know, the Austrian painter, because that's another trigger on YouTube. The Austrian painter wanted to have this like final, decisive move, right? And we know what happened after this final decisive move. So it's kind of like a replay, like a deja vu, a little. What do you think will be this le grand finale? That's my first question. And how Russia will end this?
Well, Russia's ending it right now. Russia mobilized 300,000 troops. They've reorganized their command staff. They not only have the manpower sufficient to the task, but it's been equipped with some of the most modern equipment Russia has. And they have a plan, and the plan's being executed as we speak. Russia has an extended front line with Ukraine. Russia is putting pressure on Ukraine. Since May, Russia's been running a meat grinder operation in the Bakhmut-Soledar area. An estimated 14 brigades of Ukrainian troops, brigades between 4,000 or 5,000 troops. So you do the math, and we're talking 80, 90,000 troops have been sacrificed in the Bakhmut area, which is to Russia's advantage. They're very happy with that result, and they're continuing to do that. They're making progress. A lot of people are saying, well, you have to wait till the Russians break through in Bakhmut, but they don't need to. The Bakhmut is the magnet that attracts Ukrainian reserves. And then the Ukrainian reserves gets ground up. And what's happening now is Ukraine has exhausted its reserves. You only have to take a look at the frantic pace of mobilization in Ukraine, the pathetic images of these thugs driving around and grabbing men off the streets and out of their homes in a desperate bid to fill the ranks of depleted force. And now Russia's launching offensives in the Zaporizhia area in the south that are having success. Ukraine has to divert reserves to that area to try and stop that. And as soon as they do that, the Russians open up at Ulydar, north of Bakhmut. And now they're having success. Ukrainians have to divert forces, and then they're going to open up closer to Limon in an effort up north. And again, the Ukrainians don't have any reserves left. And what's going to happen is Ukraine is going to extend its forces along a frontage it can't defend. There will be nothing in the rear, and at the appropriate time, the Russians will bring the hammer, which is the 10 to 15 divisions that they've built up, and they will come in, and it's game, set, match. It's not me just saying this. General Zaluzhny, who's the Ukrainian commander of the armed forces in Ukraine, said back last month in an interview with The Economist that if he doesn't get 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles, 500 artillery pieces, he's going to lose the conflict. He straight up said it. We're going to lose. Well, he didn't. Even with all these tanks that are being provided, it's only 140 tanks. It's less than 50% of what Zaluzhny said he needed. And they're not all going to come at once. They're going to be parceled out here, there, and everywhere. Some of them may never show up, like the American tanks that we promised, but we don't have, and we have to build, and we don't know if we can build it, and all this stuff. Others are going to be pulled out of warehouses, like the Portuguese and the Spanish tanks, and they don't work. But they're going to give them anyways. And the others are going to be brought in at, a penny pack at a time, 12 here, 14 there, thrown in with crews that don't know how to work them. It takes 22 weeks to train. modern tank crew. There aren't 22 weeks out there to train these guys. The Ukrainians are used to operating a 3-man tank crew because of automatic loaders. Every tank coming in has a 4-person crew because now they need manual loading. That's a whole different concept and approach to fighting the war. Yes, you can teach somebody to do it, but is he going to be proficient? Is the crew going to be proficient? Are they going to work as a team? But then the most important thing is, how do you maintain these tanks? We're talking about, a wide variety of tanks. I mean, the M1 Abrams, like I said, if it ever shows up, uses jet fuel. The others use diesel, but they're different engines, different packs, different maintenance issues. The Leopard 2 tank cannot be maintained by a guy who's trained to maintain the T-72. You need a Leopard 2 maintainer. The Leclerc, the French tank, needs a French maintainer. The British Challenger 2 needs the Italians, he's talking about throwing in their Italian tank. That needs a maintainer. So the stuff shows up with no maintenance capability. They all break. Tanks break. People know that. Anybody who's been involved in tanks know that it breaks. But normally you have a whole system designed. You can pull the tank off the battlefield with a tank retriever, and then people who are trained and equipped to come in and fix it will come in and do that right there on the battlefield. If it needs more, it can be pulled a little bit further back. The Ukrainians don't have that. So when this stuff breaks, you got to be taken all the way off the battlefield back to Poland and Germany. And that's just a recipe for disaster. So these tanks aren't going to have any impact on the battlefield, none whatsoever. They're going to break before they get to the battlefield. And when they come to the battlefield, they're going to be destroyed. Why? If you think that the Leopard 2 A6 variant, which is the most modern variant people are talking about getting, some of the variants are the A5, the A4, some are even Leopard 1s. But the A6, it came out in 2007. The Russians began remodernizing their military in 2008. In 2014, undertook it to remodernize it so it could fight NATO, which means that they're looking at NATO's weaponry and saying, how can we defeat this? And from 2014 until today, Russia's been building systems specifically designed to destroy NATO tanks. And they have a lot of them. So when the Leopard 2 shows up, even though it might be a qualitative advancement for the Ukrainians, it's not something that makes the Russians afraid. The Russians are not happy about this decision because this will complicate the war, extend the time of the war, cost them lives, but they are confident in their victory. They're going to destroy these tanks. And that's just a statement of fact. That's what Zaluzhny said. He's only getting less than 50% of the tanks he requested. He wanted 300, he's getting about 140, 150. He wanted 500 infantry fighting vehicles, get about 240. He wanted 500 artillery pieces, he's get about 130. So he's not getting what he wanted. And now we go to President Zelensky, who has brought this down to the basic essence. He said, if I don't get the M1 Abrams by August, it's too late. Too late for what? He knows what's happening. He knows that the war is over. He knows that he's lost. What he doesn't realize is that these tanks are purely a political gesture on the part of the collective West to save face, to say we tried to do everything we could to help these people, but there's nothing they can do to help. There's not enough tanks. There's not enough time. There's not enough support. Now they're talking about aircraft. If you want to see something that's more pathetic than the NATO effort to provide tanks to Ukraine, watch NATO try to provide aircraft. It'll be even more of a disaster. The fact of the matter is the Russians are in the process of shaping the battlefield to their singular advantage. They have sufficient resources available to exploit any opportunities that emerge as they continue to press the Ukrainians. And as Zelensky said, this war is going to be over by August. That's what's going on.
So Scott, this reminded me, you had an interview with a gentleman who was an expert in tanks, right?
Yes.
I watched it. I'm going to attach this down below the video so people can watch. It was very informative. For me, like, I don't understand a lot of those things, but just listening was giving me some idea. So it looks like not only this equipment will not fully arrive, that's one. Second is outdated. And third, we have people who are literally caught like, chase me if you can, and put inside those tanks to operate them. So it's a complete mess.
Yeah. No, it's, again, I think the media, the pro-Ukrainian, pro-Western media is selling this as a game changer. But even the Ukrainians can't tell that lie anymore. That's why Zelensky said, I need the M1 Abrams, because he knows the Leopard's not a solution. He's not getting enough of them. That's not a good tank. With the M1 Abrams, he feels that it attaches America to it and that he can suck America into the conflict. But he can't. It's not going to happen. This war is over. I mean, tragically, there's still a lot of dead people out there who are alive today who won't be alive when this war ends. But this war is over.
So let me ask you this, because I didn't have this question. Like I said, usually they are born during the conversation. Who they gonna blame for losing this war? Because for some time it looked like if Germany doesn't provide, right, they're gonna blame the Germany to some extent. That's why the war is lost, because Germany didn't, you know, show up and support it. So now who they gonna blame, Scott?
Well, of course, Ukraine is going to blame everybody but Ukraine. We're already creating the blame game. We're telling the Ukrainians that they can't, when this equipment comes in, they can't send it immediately to the front, that they have to hold on to it and create this new army and wait for everything to arrive, which means what? In the fall, early next year, when it all arrives. But the Ukrainians can't. They're going to be compelled to dispatch this equipment to the front line as soon as it shows up, which means it's going to be destroyed piecemeal. So we're going to blame the Ukrainians and say, well, you didn't do the plan. The Ukrainians are going to blame us, saying you're too late to the game. But the bottom line is there's nothing either side could have done to change the outcome. Russia right now is on a war footing. Ask yourself, why does it take the United States almost months, if not a year, to provide Ukraine with this? Do you know what the U.S. is doing? See, we're not giving them our tanks. See, our tanks are good tanks. Our tanks have depleted uranium armor, but we can't give that to the Ukrainians because it's top secret, and the Russians will capture it and learn all our secrets. The Russians already know, but it doesn't matter. We want to fake ourselves out. So we have to give them tanks with the bad armor. I mean, imagine that. You think you're getting the M1 tank, but you're actually getting some of the bad armor, the stuff the Russians will destroy that quick. But we can't even build the bad tanks anymore because we don't have a defense industry. We have one place that does this, and we have to fund them and get them up and running so they can make these tanks in time for, what, late fall? So Zelensky already said, if it's not here by August, it's too late. We're not going to make the August deadline. Meanwhile, Russia has a defense industry that's been going in full bore since 2014. They just recently expanded as part of this mobilization, and they're expanding it further to support the expansion of the Russian military to 1.5 million people with all new divisions and everything. The Russians are cranking out modern T-80 or T-90 tanks at a rate of 20 a month. And I think they're even doubling that amount. It may be up to 40 a month. So the United States, it's going to take a year to make 50 Abrams. And the Russians are cranking out the T-90, which can destroy the Abrams in a head-on fight, at 20 to 40 a month. Tell me which society is geared up for war, which society is ready, who's making the adaptations necessary to adjust to what's going on the battlefield. Russia has been adapting and overcoming all the difficulties that came. It was a peacetime army when they started this special military operation, and they learned a lot. They learned that there were some things wrong with their structure, how they were approaching things with their equipment, with mobilization, and they fixed it all. I mean, if Russia ever has to mobilize again, it isn't going to be what happened with 300, and they did do the 300,000 right. In the end, they got 300,000 well-trained troops who were well-equipped. It was sort of a struggle to get there. It won't be a struggle next time because Russia's identified the problems. They're going to fix the problems. And their defense industry now is cranking out two important factors of it. They're cranking out at a wartime pace of production, but in a manner that doesn't impact civilian economy. So it's not like World War II in America where we had the arsenal of democracy, but we had to stop producing Ford automobiles so we could produce Sherman tanks, and Americans had to tighten their belt and turn in pots and pans, metal drive and all that stuff. The Russians are out there doing what they're, you were there. Okay, it's not a wartime society. The people are eating well. There isn't this this necessity to tighten the belt, but the Russian defense industry is pumping out high quality material that is designed by intent to destroy NATO forces. So I think, Europe needs to wake up to, and you had the head of a German, the head of the German armed enterprise. I don't think he's a general. I think he's a civilian, but he's wearing a uniform. But he basically said, we're naked as it is. We have no defense. And now we're giving away what little clothes we have. We can't replace these tanks, he said. When we give away 14 tanks, we can't replace them. We don't have the ability to do this because steel is too expensive. Thanks to the sanctions against Russia have made it impossible for us to produce steel, to have these factories up and running. We can't replace these tanks. So we're only weakening ourselves further. So that's why this tank thing is just overblown. The West is making it out to be as a game changer. But the reality is all it's doing is condemning whatever crews are used to man this tank, condemning them to death. The best thing that could happen to these crews is that as they bring this equipment to the battlefield, it breaks down, because then they get out of it and it gets to be evacuated back to the rear, and maybe they're going to live. The worst thing that could happen is that it works up till the point it gets to the battlefield, because then the Russians are going to kill it.
You know what is the worst? When I'm listening to you and realizing that the average citizen doesn't know anything about it. They don't have a clue. Okay, many people have awareness, but they don't have a clue that all of this, what you just mentioned, the military complex, they know the site, each site knows what they're up to. They know exactly. And they're playing this game, but the media is just throwing, as we know, stuff on people, and they have absolutely no idea what's really going on. And they live in this illusion, in this twisted reality. So let's say this conflict is over, Scott. I really would like to know your opinion on this. So let's say it's over this year, right? The grand finale this year, right?
I believe that the military aspect of this conflict will be done by late summer, early fall. I think the Ukrainian armed forces will be destroyed. Okay,
and I think you actually mentioned this 2 interviews ago that we had. So how, in your opinion, now, when that part is done, how the collective West will behave towards Russia when the war is over? That part, how the West is going to behave towards Russia. Why I'm asking this? Because as I'm listening to the political analysts, I understand that the idea was take over Russia, conquer Russia, right? Suck the resources and all of it, and then go towards China. That's how I see it. So how are they going to go towards China if they will not grab Russia?
They're never going to go towards China. China's coming to them, not militarily, but economically. Study Europe and take a look at all the inroads China has made through their Belts and Roads Initiative into various European ports. Europe can't live without China. I mean, the idea that Europe's going to go against China is ludicrous. Europe is addicted to Chinese goods, the Chinese economy. China's put its tentacles into Europe, and the tentacles will never be taken away because there's nothing to replace them. So, I mean, Europe just has been living with fundamentally flawed assumptions for such a long time. Number one assumption was that America is its friend. America is not Europe's friend. American companies are rich. European companies are shutting down because of high energy costs. So, yeah, good job, Europe. But
yes.
The key to the future of Europe lays in what happens to the current generation of political and economic elites. I mean, we saw them just recently gather at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and it's a humiliation of humanity. It was a disgusting display of hubris and arrogance and ignorance, all wrapped into one. I mean, when you have a Harvard professor, Kenneth Rogoff, who's a member of the G30, so he's one of the elite bankers of the Western world. One of the elite bankers. He's the guy that sits there and helps draw the master plan for how the global economy will be dominated by Western bankers. So this is that level of guy. And he says the purpose of sanctions was regime change in Russia. I mean, the level of ignorance contained in that statement alone, but what was worse was how it was received by people. I mean, really? Europe? How stupid are you? So these elites have to go. They have to be purged. And so there is a process of purging. Unfortunately for the world, but fortunately for Europe, there was a relatively mild winter, which means that the harm that could have befallen Europe doesn't mean that it was easy for Europe to get through it, and we still have some weeks left where things could get tough. But it was a mild winter, so the demand on energy wasn't as much as it could have been. But nevertheless, the high cost of energy caused many German, French, and other European companies just to shut down. And they may not reopen until the energy prices are brought back into control. So a Russian military victory is going to cause Europe to come face to face with, I mean, it's literally, they're going to come to a crossroads. Where do we want to go? If Russophobia continues to grip Europe, promoted by these political and economic elites, the path they're going to take is to continue to believe that they have an obligation to build NATO up to be the kind of alliance capable of standing toe-to-toe with Russians. What they don't understand is that while Russia has taken the measures right now to build up to 1.5 million people, Europe's done nothing. Poland's done some partial mobilization of its own to increase its military to 300,000, but whether they'll be able to successfully execute that plan is another question altogether. But the rest of Europe, I mean, France is talking about doubling down on defense, but the Germans have sort of hit the nail on the head. We can't afford it. I mean, they're the only ones being honest. We can't afford it. The British, for all of their rhetoric, continue to do what the British have always been doing for the past decades, cut their military, shrink it, because they can't afford it. And at the end of the day, the problem set that Europe's getting ready to define for itself is a problem set that cannot be, Europe can't afford this. NATO can't afford this. It's too big for the resources that can be put to the task. The economies of Europe are so fundamentally broken, so fundamentally dysfunctional that they can't sustain the kind of militarization that the European political and economic elite are talking about being. So if Russia can prevail on the battlefield, as I think they're going to do, is if Russia can achieve a political settlement that gives them what they need in Ukraine, which is permanent neutrality, no NATO, and a semblance of stability, which is questionable. We still don't know what's going to happen to Western Ukraine. We don't know what's going to happen, for instance, in the Transcarpathia region, where the Hungarians are starting to make noise. So there's still a lot of potential for mischief in Ukraine, even once the Ukrainian military is destroyed. But if Russia comes out of this strong, I think Russia is going to give Europe the opportunity to take the right path, which is the path that says we want to live in peaceful harmony with Russia, recognizing both a Russian sphere of influence and a European sphere of influence, and in a manner which respects the economic and political independence and sovereignty of the respective parties. Russia's not seeking to dominate the West isn't seeking to dominate Russia. This kind of, maybe it sounds a little too kumbaya, but that's what they want.
Scott, but Washington swamp will still continue, right? Poking Russia still, even after that. This is what I'm trying to see, how this will go.
So Washington's not going to change, unfortunately.
That's what I mean. How do you think they will be behaving after the war is finished?
Well, I think the United States is going to be focused on trying to save as much as Europe as possible. And the interesting thing is, I think Europe's going to fracture along two basic spheres. One is old Europe, the other one's new Europe. Old Europe, of course, is maybe the original 16 nations of NATO, plus some major neutral powers like Sweden, because Sweden will never become part of NATO now, and Finland, who is problematic, Austria, Switzerland. They're all part of what I call old Europe. New Europe are the former Soviet republics and the former Warsaw Pact countries that are already pre-programmed to be anti-Russian. I think the United States will continue to promote the Russophobic tendencies of New Europe, the eastern part, while Western Europe recognizes the absolute requirement for a European vision of security that's independent of the United States, freed from the pressures of the United States. So the United States isn't going to be completely evicted from Europe, but I think you're going to be seeing a struggle within Europe. And the question is, can NATO survive that kind of struggle? And the answer is, on the short term, yes, because there is no alternative. But in the long term, no, because even the French now, the Germans are talking about the necessity for a European-centric security alliance arrangement that is separate from NATO. They're not talking about the dissolution of NATO, but they're talking about a need to have an alternative other than NATO to deal with European security issues. And if Europe actually goes down that path, that's the end of NATO. So I think the United States is going to be dealing with the collapse of NATO. The question is, how does Russia handle this, especially the provocations that are undoubtedly going to come from New Europe? The places I see three potential flashpoints. One, Poland and Western Ukraine. We still don't know how that's going to play out. That's a very, very important issue that Russia's going to have to manage very carefully as they look for a political termination of this conflict. The denazification aspect of it must incorporate what's called Western Ukraine, the Galician parts that have their own identity separate from the Russian part and even from Kiev. We don't know how that's going to end yet. So that's worrisome. The Baltic states are literally punk kids on a suicide trip. I mean, they are doing everything they can to provoke the Russian bear because they feel that they are immortal behind their, Article 5 protections. But I think they're going to find out that if they're talking about shutting down the Gulf of Finland to Russia, good luck. They're talking about closing down rail traffic. The Estonians are, basically outlawing being an ethnic Russian. They're doing everything they can to get Russia to take them out. And what they don't understand is if it's one thing to sit there and try to be a responsible member of the international community and have Russia attack you in an unprovoked fashion. It's another thing to sit there and kick the bear, 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 kick the bear eats you. And when the bear decides to eat you, it's going to be very fast, so fast that NATO won't be able to respond. And they're betting that NATO is willing to commit suicide because they're behaving irresponsibly. And I remind everybody that Article 5 of the NATO Charter is not an automatic. There is no guarantee that people come to your assistance. Article 5 requires people to consider coming to your assistance. But if you're behaving in a grossly irresponsible fashion, if you're kicking the bear and kicking the bear and kicking the bear until the bear eats you, I think there's a better than even chance that most of Europe's going to say, gosh, you brought that on yourself. Poland, of course, will kick and scream, but I think Poland's going to become increasingly isolated. I mean, they're making no friends right now, the Poles, especially with the Germans. And even the United States and others, we're a little fed up with the behavior of the Polish government. And so, Poland may find itself isolated. I don't think there's any worry about Russia invading Poland. The concern is that Poland's going to do something stupid in West Ukraine and then get the bloodiest nose possible. It will be ugly for Poland. And again, NATO will not come to their assistance. And then the other area is, of course, Moldova. I just see Moldova behaving extraordinarily irresponsible right now. And I'm afraid that some people in NATO, including the Poles and Romanians, may encourage Moldova to work with the Ukrainians to create a crisis in the Transnistria region, designed to divert Russian attention away from its objectives and force Russia to commit to the southern tier prematurely, come through Odessa, etc. And I think their hope is that by doing that, Russia will trigger a NATO reaction, NATO occupation. Mm-hmm. NATO's made it clear NATO's not going into Ukraine, but it still would be a very dangerous situation. So there's a lot going on that needs to be handled. The danger to the world is Eastern Europe, Poland, the Baltics, Romania. The United States is going to be seeking to exploit the Russophobic attitudes there in an effort to continue to contain and disrupt Russia. The real struggle is going to be with Western Europe politically, and the United States is going to try and keep them within the NATO alliance, discourage them from promoting a new European alliance. And I think Russia is going to be doing the opposite. I think you're going to see Russia doing a lot of outreach. This is why the Turkish energy hub is so important. that if Russia can work with Turkey to build up an energy hub, they will be able to replace the Nord Stream pipelines, which were destroyed. I mean, we just had Victoria Nuland brag about this, turning into worthless junk on the bottom of the ocean. I mean, she's a criminal. She's a war criminal, and the nation that ordered that attack is a nation of war criminals. And unfortunately, that's probably the United States, maybe with the assistance of Great Britain. But the good news in all of this is that Russia is the only adult in the room, literally the only adult in the room. And their job right now isn't to further escalation, but to, create paths of de-escalation, escalation management, make sure it doesn't spin out of control. And since Russia is so utterly in control of the situation on the battlefield, economically, etc., Russia can go faster when they need to, slow down when they need to. They can control the pace to prevent any, spinning out of control. But it's a dangerous, dangerous situation. I mean, the first thing you learn in the military is that no plan survives initial contact with the enemy. So no matter what the Russians think they want to do, how they're going to get there is going to be completely different than the plan that they've currently have, because once things start to happen, you can't predict outcomes. Things will go this way, things will go that way, and you're going to have to adapt and make adjustments. And so we know the general direction that Russia wants to go, but the exact mechanism, the exact path, it's an unknowable at this time.
Thank you, Scott. And when you were answering this, because this is actually how I felt instinctively, that Poland will continue to be used to behave in a certain way towards Russia. Okay, so this will be like the representative. However, when I'm observing what they are doing, what the government is doing in Poland, as much as I know, I wonder, to a certain point, I thought that this is all by the decisions and orders from Washington at first. But now I see that there is a big factor of just mental issues, okay? Literally mental issues, sick, literally mentally sick decisions. So how much of it is of their own craziness and how much of it is the decision from Washington? I don't know. I think it's a mix. But I just want to say those two things before I ask you my question about Poland. So there are two informations I came across very recently, actually, when I arrived here. The first one is about the agreement that Polish Post Services has signed with the Military Recruitment Center. This is an agreement for 5 years. And in this agreement, they are agreeing to collaborate on delivering to citizens sufficiently and quickly very important letters. Okay, we know what letters, military recruitment letters. Here we go. So this is one thing. Second thing is that the fire department for Poland, the commander-in-chief just gave an interview. I haven't posted this video yet, I will soon, about 10 days ago, about a new application that will be presented to Polish citizens, which will be downloaded on their phones, and then they can look where they can go and find a shelter in case, right? In case of what? In case of what, right? The point is this: we have for Poland the shelters, ancient shelters, not well maintained. They were checking them. Only 3% of Polish population at this current state would be able to find a shelter. 3% of the country, okay? And now they are coming with the app. So why I'm saying all of this in the interview with you is because you connect the dots. You look at this and you're like, okay, so here we have like letters are going to fly, right? We have the applications coming. So clearly, you know, they are trying, right? Train with the army, funny weekend, they do those things. So do you think that, I really don't feel like Poland will be able to create more of this situation with this and enter this conflict because Russia will end it before, like it will be too late for Poland. I really hope, I really hope they will not do anything. They will not take anyone anywhere.
Well, I think what we're seeing here is, I mean, if Poland had a legitimate reason to fear an eventual Russian military move against it, then these are adequate decisions that must be taken. I mean, a nation has a duty and responsibility for self-defense. And so to streamline the mechanisms of mobilization is a smart thing. And if they've taken a look at Poland, they realize that the best way to do this is have a collaborative relationship with the Postal Service. Smart move. If you think you're going to go to war with Russia and be subjected to, aerial attacks, nuclear or non-nuclear, it's imperative that you have a civil defense plan in place. And so publishing an app that tells people where to go, a smart move. But here's the problem. Russia's not getting ready to go to war with Poland. It's Poland getting ready to go to war with Russia. And that's where people have to stand up because, again, I believe in strong defense. I believe in being prepared. And I also believe that if somebody's threatening to attack you, you need to be able to repel that attack, or else you'll just be a servant nation your entire life. But I also believe that that fear can be exploited by people who have bad intent. And it seems to me that there's certain elements within the Polish government that are generating fear and using these mechanisms to generate fear, promote bad policy. The fact of the matter is, Russia didn't want to go to war in Poland. We know this. We know Russia did everything humanly possible to avoid, not Poland, Ukraine. Did everything possible to avoid this. That it was the West, it was France, it was Germany, it was Poland, it was the United States that promoted this conflict and encouraged this conflict and generated this conflict. If you think that the significant level of Polish, we call them mercenary, but manpower and equipment that's been provided. Poland's provided over 200 tanks already to Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 200 tanks.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And most of those tanks were manned by Poles, not Ukrainians. And there's Polish infantry battalions working in support of them. The Polish army is on the ground in Ukraine today. They just don't call it the Polish army. If you think that didn't happen, that this happened on its own, you're wrong. The Poles have had a plan in place for some time to do just this. And that plan is being implemented, it's being executed. So the Poles are to blame for this conflict, singularly. They play a heavy role, and the Russians know this. Go talk to the Russian soldiers on the front line. Listen in. Have them give you the radio that listens in on the radio traffic of the Ukrainians. Overwhelmingly, they hear Polish voices. Overwhelmingly, the majority of the voices they intercept are Polish voices. Then there's a lot of English voices, a lot of French voices, a lot of other voices, but the voice that they should be hearing that they're not hearing much of are Ukrainian voices. So what does that tell you? That Poland's been preparing for this, that Poland's been doing this. To what end? Is it to defeat Russia, or is it to create the conditions for the annexation of Western Ukraine by, and here's the sickest part, by helping Ukraine destroy itself? Because the only way Poland was going to be able to take over Western Ukraine is for Ukraine to destroy itself as a modern nation state, thereby making the annexation of Western Ukraine a political possibility. It's not going to happen. Belarus isn't going to allow it to happen. Russia's not going to allow it to happen. But in the sick mind of these Polish politicians, it's increasingly, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, but sometimes you gotta say, well, how does this all make sense? And to sacrifice thousands of Polish lives, as they are in Eastern Ukraine right now, to what end? Not defeating Russia. They're making Russia stronger. It's to defeat Ukraine, to encourage Ukraine to continue the fight, to continue a war that is destroying Ukraine as a modern nation state, thereby to make it more likely than not. And what's the one area of Ukraine that suffered the least amount of damage? Western Ukraine. So they're allowing all of Ukraine to be destroyed except the West, and then they're going to absorb the West into their. So who knows? Only one day the archives will be opened up and all these secrets will spill out. Maybe that day will come sooner. come sooner if the Polish people rise up and overthrow this government and then get to see what happened. But who knows? But the truth will come out. Poland is a dysfunctional nation with a government that is not looking out for the best interests of Poland at all. They're alienating themselves from everybody in the world. And soon Poland will find itself to be a nation with no friends.
And very sadly, I agree with what you said, especially the last part. And I think the true test will be when, I hope it won't happen, but when those letters will start to be sent out, because then you will see the reaction of the citizens. I mean, if they don't react now, then when are they going to flee the country? I don't know. But I have one more question, Scott, and I just want to ask you if you can answer it, but if you can be maybe, how to say, I will ask you, but it's a very, it's a question that might trigger YouTube, but I never ask you this, and I always
trigger what?
YouTube algorithm, because it's very sensitive.
Okay, I'll be
to
careful how
words.
I answer it then.
Okay, when you were, let's start with this. I'm very aware that each war, each conflict creates enormous opportunity for the most profitable business in the world, which is human trafficking. And I wanted to ask you this for a very long time. When you were in Iraq, you've seen a lot of things. I'm sure you have seen a lot of things. You've heard a lot of things. What is the awareness of American soldier? What is how they feel knowing what's really going on? Because this for sure was happening in Iraq as well.
Well, I'll start with this. It's hard for me to talk about the American soldier because I wasn't there during 2003 war. But I was there in the decade and from 1991 to 1998 when economic sanctions were destroying the social fabric of Iraq. And the one thing that you saw was the Iraqis. Prostitution in a Muslim society is a very touchy subject. Muslim women, it's haram, it's forbidden. They can't be prostitutes and they're treated harshly. But in Iraq, they had, there's a certain tribe, they call them gypsies, but basically the women of this tribe were allowed to be belly dancers, allowed to entertain, allowed to perform in nightclubs, even under during the time of Saddam Hussein, it was encouraged. And when the insiders of Saddam would hold a party, they would always bring these women there to entertain. They were prostitutes. They just didn't call them prostitutes, but they were prostitutes. And so that always was there. But what you saw as the economy collapsed, Kurds and Christians first, because they are outsiders in a Muslim society. You started to see that the first thing is that they start looking for foreign husbands, and so you see them gravitate to where the United Nations is, and they all want to become the girlfriend of these UN people. Maybe there's some honest people who truly fall in love and will marry a girl for legitimate reasons and start a family. That's always a possibility. You never know with humans. But what happens is the girls become so desperate and the families become so desperate to get their daughter out of the country that they turn a blind eye. Because normally you wouldn't expect a Christian family to allow their daughter to have sexual relations with a foreigner freely and openly. But the family did it because they believed that was the only way for the love to manifest itself, and that eventually the man would do the honorable thing and bring the daughter out, and then the family could follow. But I watched as UN inspectors exploited the situation over and over and over and over again, especially the people, the permanent staff. They just flitted from one girl to another. And what you have to understand is when you use a girl in that fashion, you destroy her. The family will allow this to happen if she can get married and be brought out. But if you soil a girl and then you abandon her, she is disgraced, dishonored, and so is the family. And then the community turns in on itself. She will be killed. The family will be ostracized, and it's the end of that family unit. And this happened all the time. And the girls that were used by the inspectors, the only place they could go now is to work the hotels. They became the prostitutes.
But
and
Scott,
that was there. That was
but
reality.
but you know what I really meant asking you? I meant of that number of missing children, women, mainly women and children, that are used.
I don't know about that. I didn't see, to be honest, what I saw in terms of children was the Iraqi mothers started to beg. And, that, of course, under Saddam, there was no begging because everybody's taken care of. But now mothers would come out in the parks and they'd have their children, and then as you drive by, the children are starving to death, literally. And so we'd stop and give them food and water. But over time, you just see that gradually the children are disappearing. And the question is, did they die?
Right.
Or did something else happen? Did something else happen? And I can't answer that question. I don't know the answer to that question. I was not personally aware of any, child trafficking that was taking place, if that's the question that you're asking. I have no evidence. I would say that once a society succumbs to the sex trade, that anything's possible. But I have no evidence of any of that other stuff happening, because I only had superficial knowledge of the sex trade. I only saw I can't even say mine, because my teams were in for a short period of time, and I kept an iron grip on them. But we could see what would happen with the long-term teams, the teams that were there for a long period of time, and what was happening, and that was heartbreaking. I mean, I don't know how many times I had a Kurdish or a Christian girl come up, and because I was well known, I was Abu Azamat, the father of all crises. I was on TV every time I came in, so I was supposedly a man of great power and influence. And every time I'd get ready to leave Iraq, easily a dozen people would come up and hand letters to me. Could you get this to this guy? Could you please? He hasn't written back to me. He promised to write. I don't know what happened. Could you find out what happened to him? And they'd give me these letters, and and on the one hand, I have to be careful, because is it a provocation on the part of the Iraqi government? But and on the other hand, it's personal. I can't open the letters and read them. It's personal. I mean, you can't do that. But then you come back and they're there. Did you reach him? Did you do this? And they're desperate and they're crying, they're breaking down, and you're just like, holy cow. And I mean, I have to tell you, the years 1997, 1998 were extraordinarily difficult in that regard, because the presence of the United Nations grew and expanded, and so there's this horrific exploitation of the local social economic collapse, and it broke my heart. I mean, it literally broke my heart, because A, it's happening, but B, what do you do about it? I mean, what do I do? What do I do with those letters? That's the ultimate thing. I mean, I didn't want to take the letter, but they're crying. They're literally crying. They're getting physically sick. They're breaking down. So you take the letter in hopes to bring some sort of comfort to the person. But now what do? I tried on occasions to deliver the letters, but then I found out that the guy was married with kids. So now do I destroy that? And so I can't deliver that letter. And then other times I had to be careful, because the letter could be a provocation, but I can't read the letter to find out if it's a provocation. And so more oftentimes than not, to be frank, the letters got thrown in a fireplace and got burned to eliminate all evidence of it. And but I've never talked about this before. That was a very very difficult part of the job. You'd like to believe that the United Nations is this wonderful thing, but we know it's not. We know what they've done in Haiti. We know what they've done in Africa. We know what they've done elsewhere. And unfortunately, in Iraq, we had a similar level of exploitation. But your fundamental question about child trafficking, no, I have no evidence that happened.
Thank you for
I'm not saying it
answering
didn't.
this.
I'm just
Of
saying I have no
course.
evidence
Yes, yeah.
because it
I
wasn't my
think
job to investigate. I mean,
no, thank you. No, I think we all know really the answer. I was just wondering, but this is true human tragedy. This is what war does to people on so many levels.
Oh yeah.
I cannot, I mean, you've been in those situations and I mean, you understand this. I cannot imagine the psyche of people after this, how you heal, how you center yourself back again, you know, and
You know, I will say one thing, it's not about Iraq, it's about Europe. It's about what happened in Bosnia and what happened in Kosovo. If you go to Germany, outside of every major American base, there's a hotel-like facility that's fully staffed with girls who are registered with the local authorities. They have medical certificates and all this kind of stuff. They're prostitutes. And the American servicemen are frequent guests to these establishments. And it's accepted by the military and local society as a way of reducing sexual tension so you don't have rapes and all this kind of stuff. It's reality. Then the troops go to Bosnia, they go into Kosovo. Bosnia is a totally different place. I mean, the stories I've heard about the trafficking and the active participation of American military personnel in the trafficking are sickening. But the other thing was what happened in Hungary, because Budapest became one of the destinations for liberty, for R&R, rest and recreation, and so these American troops would go on liberty in Budapest. And the menu of sexual opportunity that was provided to them would literally make you sick, and yet they're actively participating in this stuff. And I'm not going to talk about it here, but you can use your take your worst imagination of the worst thing you could possibly think, and it's probably worse than what you could possibly think. And yet these guys who are hyped up and over-sexualized, and then they go to the sickest possible adult fantasy land where anything is possible. And so it happened in Europe. I don't know if it's still happening in Europe. I'd like to believe that the Hungarians have cleaned that up, that their economic situation. But you know, all throughout the 1990s, the former Warsaw Pact countries were horrible. I don't know if I talked about did I talk about the Middle East? You know, in Bahrain, when the inspecting teams first came in, you know, you're in the hotels and they have the bars, and then they have an area where a live band plays. And they were exclusively Filipinos. And first of all, they're the greatest musicians, greatest mimics in the world. They could play any song and they could play it just like it was on the record or a live performance. It's perfect. But the rumor was that the girls also had a side job as escort. But it was if it happened and it was just a rumor, they did it discreetly. Nobody knew. It wasn't in your face. Nothing. It was it was there. And the reason why I suspect it's true is that Bahrain's where the Saudi Arabians would come in, and they have the Bridge of Shame. You see, you go across the causeway, and on the other side, there's a lot of mosques that are built by the Saudi princes who believe that if you build a mosque, you atone for the sins that took place in Bahrain. But the Saudis would come in, and they had arrangements. So I think the girls were there to service the Saudis. But it was also a place that had a lot of Westerners coming in, not just the inspectors, but we had a Fifth Fleet was in Muharraq. We had air bases. The British were there, especially after the Gulf War. And so what you saw around 1990, again, 1996, 1997, is the Filipino bands were being replaced by Ukrainian bands or Russian bands. So you had these bands come in, and unlike the Filipinos, these bands were horrible. They played the pitchiest music. They couldn't mimic anything, thick accents, and the girls dressed like absolute bad words. And they were there for one reason and one. They weren't there to sing. They were there to sexually serve anybody and everybody. And it just, it spiraled out of control. And it was heartbreaking because I had been in the Soviet Union and I know what a Soviet woman is. A proud woman, a woman that is respectful of, you know, her status and her honor and, you know, things of that nature. And these girls were the exact opposite, but they were a product of that. But I guess because of the horrific economic reality in their homeland, they had no choice but to do this. And so they were brought out and they'd be flown in, and it literally broke your heart because, I mean, you couldn't even try to talk to them because the second you talked to them, you realized that they didn't want to be there. I mean, they had these eyes, they were dead eyes, literally dead eyes. Normally, if you talk to somebody, there's life in somebody's eyes and you can talk to them and you see hope, and these were just dead eyes, people that were literally living death, just going through the motions because they had no other opportunity. And that was heartbreaking too. That was you know, very, very heartbreaking. I hope that because the situation has improved in Russia, that you won't see that. But what people don't understand about the war in Ukraine is that you're condemning the women of Ukraine to a horrible existence because society doesn't know how to handle refugee women. They just don't. Or even worse, homeless children. Go to Seattle and take a look at what happens to homeless children. So, you know, I don't know if I answered your question. I think I might have opened up a bigger bag of worms, but it's
no. But I think it's so important you're talking about it because, you know, when you talk about the military moves and the political events, we tend to not really give that much attention to what are the consequences of all those actions, right? Because at the end, then you have the humans suffering, and this is like for generations.
Yeah.
It's for like those letters. This stays with the family and it goes on. It's like it needs healing, really.
Let me ask you this. I'll make the following prediction. Poland is creating permanent American military installations. I will predict in the next year or two that you will see facilities outside that are staffed by Ukrainian girls.
Well,
and that's all I'm going to say. And that's the future of Ukraine. That's the future of Ukrainian women, because their country's destroyed. They have Poland doesn't want them. Poland's not going to integrate them as normal. And so Poland's going to use them as a buffer against the Americans, poisoning the Polish well, so to speak. And so they're going to put these girls out there. And then once you do that, because they have there's nobody out there defending them.
No home to go back to, Scott, right? There's no home to go back
to. And believe me, the American men aren't going to marry them. They're not going to marry them.
So yeah, like let's think about those things, because this is the final result of all those wars and conflicts. Yeah. What happens to humans?
Yeah,
what happens to societies?
Men can go be criminals and still have pride. And I mean, even though they're doing crime, they can still be a man among other men. But women know. Women know when somebody has crossed a line, and you can tell in their eyes. As I said, the deadness of the eyes is a dead giveaway. It means that they've gone down a path for which there's literally no return. You don't see very many men that have dead eyes. Men will always try to find a way to get out of it. But I saw a lot of dead eyes in the Middle East. Heartbreaking.
Scott, thank you so much, first of all, for answering this last question, because I know it's not easy topic, but I think it's very important to actually talk about it. And for your time today. So yes, let's see how this will end and how soon this will end. I still have a feeling that Poland is not going to go any deeper into this. Simply, it won't last that long for it to participate more. That's how I feel, I hope. But if anyone would like to follow Scott, you will find links down below this video. So Scott has YouTube channel with interviewing his guests. All the books you can also find down below the video, and the direct link should be working again. Last time you were telling me, guys, that is not, it should be working to the publisher and to the Amazon directly. So you can order also in the ebook and Telegram, because I'm not mentioning Twitter anymore again.
Oh, I'm on Twitter.
Again, okay.
I'm back on Twitter, so
Okay,
so there it
this
is. Let's finish with a positive note, okay? Because we just went down a rabbit hole, and we need to come out of that rabbit hole. And I'm back on Twitter, able to communicate, and I'll leave this with you too. As bad as things are, I think what we're doing here is trying to promote communication, building bridges, of cross-cultural communication, and let's just keep doing that. Hopefully, by encouraging this kind of communication, we can engender enough hope among enough people that we can make real and lasting change for the better. So there, positive note to end this on. We don't need to be negative.
Thank you so much. I agree 100%. Thank you everyone for watching, for your time, attention, for supporting my channel, and for always coming back to my conversations with Scott, because I agree they are very important. And until next time, everyone. Here we go.